section that takes place, much of the book takes place on the corner of 16th and Sanchez Streets, but this takes place in a neighborhood that no longer exists in San Francisco called Gator Ville. Does that word mean anything to anybody? No. So Gator Ville was the name of married student housing at San Francisco State. And it was, then it became known as family student housing because most of the people actually weren't married after a while. There was a lot of divorced people. And it was called Gatorville after, not alligators, but after the Golden Gate Bridge, like the sports teams at SFSU. So it's about a protest that's happening because we're about to be evicted from our homes. And back in the day in San Francisco, we used to protest so that we didn't have to spend the night on the street. But times change. My parents had taken us on long marches against the Vietnam War years before, so my brothers and I knew about holding up signs and chanting with a large group of people. Now we found ourselves with a crowd of maybe 50, mostly Gatorville residents, plus a few students who would come out for any picket line taking place on campus. The fog made this southwestern strip of San Francisco perpetually chilly, so we were wearing sweatshirts with hoods, the drawstrings pulled tight around our chins. "Hell no, we won't go," we shouted joyously, our voices ringing with sweet determination as we walked in a large circle in front of the administration building. There were dozens of kids in the group, and we thought it was fun to have a common enemy, to point up to the window where that enemy, the president of the university, was sitting behind his big, shiny desk trying to ignore us. A reporter from the campus paper took our quotes and pictures. We smiled and waved our signs as if we were at a baseball game, cheering for our team. Then we got back in the circle and walked around and around until it got dark and cold, and then we straightened that circle into a line and we all walked home. My mother's main contribution to the protest, besides placards, enthusiasm, and her children, was a community poetry book. She wanted the university administrators, the other people on campus and in the city, even ourselves, a loose collection of broken families, to see us as a neighborhood, as a people worthy of saving. My mother was discovering poems, the writing of them, the publishing of them in small bound books, the reading of them in coffee houses filled with smoke and bad lighting and sometimes a microphone, the power of them to fill up her empty spaces. Her passion was free speech and self-expression. She wanted children and adults to say what was on their minds, and she gave me my first blank book for my 13th birthday so I could say what was on mine. My poem for the community anthology was called Gatorville Sucks. It was all about the cockroaches and everything else I hated about our new house, about our house, including the fact that it no longer housed my whole family because my parents had divorced here and my dad moved out. The picture accompanying my poem was of a cockroach, too. A long, thin, matronly one ready to hatch 1,000 babies that would then invade our beds and cupboards, crawling over our underwear and books and toothbrushes. My mother loved my poem for its feistiness and its veracity. Even then, I was bolder with the truth and with anger than she would ever be. Others in Gatorville, a neighborhood trying to present a united front against a pending eviction, did not love the poem and its many graphic depictions of everything bad about where we lived. The peeling lead paint, the pathetic swing set and the so-called playground, the front doors so easily broken into with just the swipe of a library card against the lock. My mother had to fight for it, but my poem and all its rage made it into the book. Soon the university was sending out negotiators to meet up with the Gatorville residents who were heading up the protest against tearing down our crummy houses and replacing them with a parking lot. The college's offer, and it was tantalizing, was to put us up for the duration of our leases in a private housing development on the other side of campus. That's Park Merced, for anybody who has. These were not the projects. These were real private homes with the generic suburban tidiness that seemed opulent to us. But the deal was they would only be ours for a year at our current rental rates. After our leases ran out, we'd have to pay the market value, 3 or 4 times what we were paying for the university housing, or more likely be out on the streets looking for another cheap place to live much further from the campus. One afternoon, we met the university man at one of the houses, a 2-story duplex bordered with lawn and hedges, so he could give us a closer look. We knew the offer was really a bribe, since it required us to stop the protests and pull out of the legal battles in exchange for a limited time in a house like this. And we knew that we had the moral as well as the practical obligation to turn down the offer, because the fight wasn't just for us, the current residents, but also for students in the future who would need an affordable place to house themselves and their families while they went around to school. Still, it was hard to walk around these soundless carpeted floors, to run our fingers along the formica in the kitchen, to look at the staircase that divided the bedrooms from the living rooms without drooling. The university man wore a suit and an over-trying smile. He led a half-dozen harried parents and a dozen rowdy kids from room to room. The parents walked slowly, trying to muffle their desire, while the kids ran up and down the stairs, opening and closing windows and doors, shouting out about the ice maker in the fridge and the light inside the oven, and how there was a bathroom on each floor and each bedroom had its own closet, and asking, "Are we going to live here, Mom? Is this our new house?" The university man winced against the noise, but he knew it was helping his cause, and so he worked even harder on his smile. Then he caught sight of me, a 12 or 13-year-old girl, standing with the pack of adults. Even then I knew this house was a tease, that we would move and then move again and again, but we would never live in a place like this, a place I could invite anyone into. The university man widened his eyes as if asking me how I liked the place, as if the decision were mine to make. I met his gaze and just shook my head no. Years later, I would return to see what happened to our neighborhood. Finally ready to look at the parking lot that had replaced our homes. I took the streetcar and then walked down the sloping hill toward the basin. When I reached the ledge where the shortcut had been, looked down to see the inevitable, I was hit with a shock that no one could have prepared me for. Instead of asphalt and metal, instead of white lines and rows of cars, there was a massive, gleaming lawn. We had believed that concrete was the enemy, but grass, it turns out, is meaner than you'd think. A bright, happy green was growing over everything, over the streets and the speed bumps where we used to pop wheelies on our bikes, over the laundry room and the free box, over the community center and the giant eucalyptus trees, over the catwalks and staircases and bedrooms, wiping out every last vestige of our lives, even the cockroaches. Down on the lawn, where our houses and streets used to be, a young man who probably lived in the dorms nearby was practicing his punts with a football. He'd kick the ball, then jog down the field to retrieve it before kicking it back the other way. I had the urge to shout out to him, "Don't you do that," as if he were playing in a church. But instead I walked the long way down to the access road, the one street that still remained, and then walked along the sidewalk to the spot where my building had stood. There, painted on the curb, were our names: Caleb L., Juan and Delmar Rule, Francis the Great. I don't know how they survived.